Good afternoon. Welcome to Hey. It's always like this. This event is sponsored by British Pugwash. For those who don't know, the first Pugwash conference on science and world affairs was held in 1957, following an appeal jointly written by Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein about the dangers of nuclear war, and it has since become an international network that brings together scientists and others to work towards the elimination of weapons of mass destruction by contributing to scientific, evidence-based governmental policy making, which seems like a good idea at the moment, and by promoting international dialogue across divides, again. It won the Nobel Peace Prize, along with its founder, Joseph Rotblat, in 1995, which was the 50th anniversary of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and coincidentally a year after the signing of the Budapest Memorandum, which we will come on to. I'm very pleased to be sitting here with Professor Serhii Plokhy, Professor of Ukrainian History at Harvard University and author of The Nuclear Age, An Epic Race for Arms, Power and Survival. For anyone who has heard the word Chernobyl, it is obvious why a Professor of Ukrainian History should also be an expert in nuclear matters. But people may know less about the Budapest Memorandum, and I think I'd like to start there, because I do think it is an important high watermark in the story which you've been writing. So could you tell people who don't know about the Budapest Memorandum, what is it?
Sure. First of all, thank you. It's wonderful to see all of you, and Oliver, it's a pleasure and honor to be in conversation with you. Yes, Budapest Memorandum, this is something that happened in 1994. My guess is by that time most of people in this audience were already born, but I don't know how much you remember about 94. There was the Soviet Union, which was the nuclear superpower, and it fell apart in 1991. Was dissolved within few short days after Ukrainians voted for their independence, with more than 92% supporting independence. And what happened that suddenly there were not one nuclear state, but 4 nuclear states: Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. And Russia didn't like this new arrangement, and the United States didn't like that new arrangement. And the idea was that we will take the nuclear weapons and we'll put it to Russia. And Ukrainians had an issue with that, because when all of that was happening in 92, 93, Russia was already making territorial claims on Ukrainian territory, on the Crimea in particular. And they considered that to be unfair, that the nuclear weapons that they also contributed to building, there was uranium ore in Ukraine, produced missiles and things like that, would go to Russia, that threatens Ukraine and Ukrainian integrity. And they wanted compensation, and they wanted guarantees that if they give up nuclear weapons, they would not be attacked. And instead of guarantees, they received a piece of paper called Budapest Memorandum, where the promises were given. The promises were called not guarantees, but assurances. And one of the countries that provided those guarantees/assurances, Russia, two decades later, attacked Ukraine, and we have now the largest war in Europe in the 21st century, in the world in the 21st century, in Europe since 1945. So that's the Budapest Memorandum, something that was celebrated for a long period of time as really the major achievement of non-proliferation. Immediately, 3 countries gave up nuclear weapons, and now is viewed as one of the major preconditions, precursors for the largest war in Europe in 21st century, producing major problems for non-proliferation for the future. Now you have to be really crazy. If you are a leader of a country, whether it's a democratic country or you are an autocrat, it doesn't matter. Giving up nuclear weapons, if you have them, that means opening the door and possibilities for the war, for your country being destroyed. And that's where we are now, with good intentions, big successes of the 1990s and huge problems and threats now in the 21st century.
So the Budapest Memorandum always seems to me like almost a high watermark for that particular form of naive optimism of the 1990s, the sort of end of history period, when everyone was going to be a liberal democracy and there would be no war ever again, and everyone would be happy.
Yeah, I agree.
Obviously now, particularly with the recent war between the United States and Israel and Iran over their nuclear program, although of course that was obliterated as well last year, it feels like we're on the verge of a new nuclear age with new nuclear powers coming into being. Would you agree? Do you think that it feels like that optimism was not only misplaced, but is actually now we've gone wildly in the other direction?
Yeah, 1990s was the moment of, again, the end of history, the victory of liberal democracy, but also the victory of non-proliferation. Not only those three republics, Soviet republics, they got rid of nuclear weapons, but also South Africa, that developed its nuclear capabilities on its own, decided to give them up. Why? Because to enter the world, the liberal world as existed in the 1990s, you had to sign a non-proliferation agreement and enter it as non-nuclear power, then you will be recognized. And South Africa had all sorts of issues with, of course, legitimacy of its regime. And at the same time, when power was actually shifting there was the black majority was coming into politics as not only an opposition, but also as a ruling group. At the same time, also the decisions were made. That's 1990s. But starting already with the beginning of the 21st century, you see the resumption of the nuclear age. And it comes with the US in particular reacting to the threats that it saw were coming, of course, after 9/11, but Iraq was there, and then there was North Korea, and the idea was that US would protect itself with the shield, something that during Reagan times was called Star Wars, right? Strategic Defense Initiative. And that really opened the chain reaction, where now there are very few agreements controlling, to say nothing about limiting the nuclear armaments that are in place. The 70s, 80s, a lot of that stuff was signed by US and Soviet Union at that time, but by now there is very few left. We are really on there are much more drivers now on the nuclear highway than it was back in 1970 or during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And there is very few traffic lights. And in that sense, we are potentially, we are certainly in a worse place than we were in the 70s, 80s, or 90s.
So I'm not going to go all the way back to the beginning of the book, because it goes back more than a century, and I don't think we've got time to cover all that. But I would like to go back to the creation of the first atomic bomb, the story, obviously, in the film Oppenheimer. And I'm interested in what the motivation was. I'm interested to explore the motivation of the people who first had the idea of creating the atomic bomb. So, it's one of these genies that once it comes out of the bottle, it's quite hard to stop other people opening the bottle. Yeah. But it's just interesting, the people who first did it, fully aware of the danger and the potential downside of what they were doing. What was their motivation?
One of the key themes in the book is called fear. And fear is the most common reason why nations acquire nuclear weapons. You can fear the other country with nuclear capabilities, or you can fear overwhelming force, conventional force that is there. There are also other issues there. There would be the great power status and pride and other things, and all of that also contributes to a different degree, but it's mostly fear. And you probably listening to that and asking yourself a question, whom did the United States and Oppenheimer and who created the bomb, who were they concerned about? And their concern was Germany, Nazi Germany, because the US is, and still continues, I don't know for how long, is of course a scientific superpower, but it was not in that place around the year 1939. The countries that produced most Nobel laureates in physics in particular were United Kingdom and Germany. And Germany were in particular ahead with the nuclear research, which really scared people, a lot of people working on that subject, because in Germany, the nuclear physics were considered to be Jewish physics. And the traditional one was considered to be German physics. So when the anti-Semitic laws were implemented, a lot of people who were working on the nuclear side left for UK in particular, left also for the United States. And they were really terrified about what was happening in Germany. The same was happening in Italy with Fermi, the major contributor to the building of the American bomb, who left fascist Italy. And they really brought that awareness that Germans were so far ahead, that with Hitler there can be a nuclear war. They brought it to UK. Refugees were not, scientists were not allowed to work on the really sensitive issues like radar, for example, because they were not trusted. So they were put to work on something that had no significance. the things nuclear. And again, this is German and European scholars who really bring this to the attention of their colleagues. And again, UK, since Rutherford and so on and so forth, really, that's where, if not most, then a lot of nuclear development was happening. And after that, there is awakening of the Americans, and the UK was ahead in terms of theoretical research on the nuclear bomb than was US, but US had the resources. And US has a security of being behind the Atlantic Ocean and having a huge country. They found a place in New Mexico desert so that no foul German attacks could get there, and eventually build the bomb, spending enormous amount of money at that time. It seems to me around $2 billion in that currency, not current currency. And it was so costly because it was new and they were making a lot of wrong turns. But at the end of the day, that was fear of Hitler's bomb that really mobilized the Americans, and then the fear of the American bomb that mobilized others. And again, UK was responding to that partially out of the security concerns about the Soviet Union during the Cold War, partially out of the issues of prestige and great power status at the time when empire was falling apart.
Oh, I mean, obviously there's a very curious paradox with the fact that the designers of the bomb, the people who did the science and did the engineering required to build this astonishingly expensive thing, were motivated above all by fear of Hitler's regime.
Right.
And then the bomb was dropped in Japan. So, but no one was apparently that scared of the Japanese regime to want to build an atomic bomb. So, I mean, there is an interesting question of why a bomb built to be dropped, if on anyone, on the Germans, should have ended up being dropped on the other side of the world.
I think that's the most amazing, but also maybe one of the most disturbing stories that in the book. So a number of scholars, once they realized that the bomb would not be ready there before the end of the war with Germany, decided to leave the project. So there is a number of people who left Manhattan Project before the bomb was built because they thought that would be a crime to have a bomb if Hitler doesn't have the bomb. Others, when they got closer in 1945 to the Trinity test, to the first successful test of the bomb, really were raising all sorts of questions, were in revolt. And Oppenheimer's position was that he wanted the bomb to be built, he wanted it to be tested, and he wanted it to be tested on humans. And the question is, why? What is there? And his position aligned with the position of the American government, but had a very different motivation that was supported by many scholars. They knew that they created or were about to create a Frankenstein. And their vision was that, well, unless we really show how horrible this thing is, people will not know about that and would sleepwalk into the nuclear war. Crazy idea. Hundreds of thousands of people built. But guess what? We are still scared and afraid in the world as a whole of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But I don't want to be in a position of Oppenheimer or anybody else to answering that sort of question, even if I would get right the way how he got right. But it's also another amazing part of the story is that it's A.G. Wells who really predicted in 1913 this sort of impact of the nuclear weapon on the humankind. And he thought that if there would be a nuclear war, there would be a global government, because otherwise you would not keep world from fighting the war and destroying yourself. So he imagined the weapon, the most horrible weapon, as the way to build peace. And thank God we don't have war since global war, since 1945. And I think because H.G. Wells and Oppenheimer were right and continue to be right, I hope it will continue that way. Nuclear weapons, the fear of the global destruction, really what holds us back from walking into another global conflict.
It's the curious morality of scientists, or the curious moralities of different scientists, is a sort of recurrent theme throughout the book. And it's an interesting development that as soon as the Americans had an atomic weapon, or became very close to having an atomic weapon, a number of scientists thought that it would only be fair, therefore, to share the secret with the Soviet Union, because it wouldn't be fair if only one country had an atomic bomb. There's a sort of terrible ratchet to this, that as soon as one gets it, then everyone has to have it. So could you talk a little bit about that? Because it is, and also, I suppose, how important that espionage or sharing was to the Soviet bomb project.
Thank you. Yeah, scientists and issues of morale. I discovered a lot of things that I didn't expect to discover. So there is a sort of international community of scientists, especially they were the pioneers, right? And that applies to other fields as well, probably to AI people now, and then it was to the scientists. And they all work together, and then World War I happens. And they go and shoot at each other, and people who were involved in nuclear research and chemists, they create all sorts of poison gases and destroy each other. And the war comes to an end, and those who survive, they're back and award each other with the Nobel Prizes for the discovery. So the degree to which they're driven by, I don't know, it's ego or something else, but the value of discovery itself, the value of knowledge itself, that very often crosses the political lines and state lines, which of course creates preconditions for sharing information. And the states are there trying to stop scientists from sharing information. The story of the execution of the atomic spies in the United States, so that's how far the state is prepared to go to really preclude the sharing of the information, right, among the scholars, or illegal forms of sharing the information. Many of those who worked on the Manhattan Project, as I said, some of them left because they were disillusioned. Others left because they felt that that was unfair. In what way? The bomb is there only because me and my mind, I imagined that, or I solved this or that problem, and there is thousands of problems like that. And now I can't tell what to do with that bomb. I have no control. The guys who paid $2 billion, the government really now has the decision power. Thank you very much. We paid your salary. We provided you with research that you could build up not only the bomb, but also your ego. But now this is ours. And there is a discontent. And some of them go further in terms of not just moral thinking, but rational thinking, following in A.G. Wells' footsteps, saying that, well, if there is just monopoly on the nuclear weapon, that country can go around and boss everyone and use this bomb again because they would not be concerned that the bomb can be used against them. So what we really have to do is to break monopoly on control of the bomb. And you have such thing as atomic espionage against the United States, against UK and Britain, and among those German scholars who came to UK and eventually went to US to work on Manhattan Project. The traditional line is, okay, they were communists or leftists and they were doing that for those reasons. And that was part of the story. But another part of the story was that they thought, okay, we can't just allow just monopoly, one country having the bomb. We have to create a balance, which is, again, another crazy idea. More bombs, more stability. And at the end of the day, they turned out to be right, despite the fact that they were going in prison and ending on the electric chair and so on and so forth, because we are here because of what Churchill in the 1950s called the balance of terror. The other guy is afraid to use nuclear weapons because there is someone else with nuclear weapon, and there is a price to pay for that. So I a little bit built on Churchill's saying, and I talk about the balance of fear because it's not enough to threaten. It's a very important part is that the other guy would actually have that fear. And so fear creates the bomb, but also fear allows us to continue with our life. But for that, you have monopoly on the bomb can't exist.
I mean, although you're right, that calculation was correct. It does feel at times that was more by luck than judgment. Some of the politicians at the time were kind of astonishingly blasé about the effects of the bomb. There's this, obviously famously satirized in Dr. Strangelove, but
right.
But there's this line from Mao Zedong who says that if 300 million Chinese people have to die, then that doesn't matter because the survivors would have children. It was astonishing what politicians were saying about the bomb at that period.
Yes, and Mao Zedong was an outlier, right? So he takes this position. They don't have, when he says that they don't have bomb yet, either atomic or hydrogen bomb, and he tells this is a paper tiger. So that's about fear, right? So not to demonstrate that you are scared. And Stalin was playing that game for the first 4 years after Americans got the bomb. But it doesn't mean that he wasn't scared. In the late 1960s, the main threat of the nuclear war in the world was coming not out of the competition and conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, but because of the rapidly worsening relations between the Soviet Union and China. Skirmishes over territory in the Far East and in Central Asia, and the Soviets leaked information to Europe, and through Europe it came to China that they were prepared to attack with nuclear weapons the Chinese nuclear sites. And Mao Zedong left Beijing and didn't live in his capital for almost 1 year. So, and that's just an indication that yes, rhetoric is different, positions are different, but deep down that's works even on really tough talkers like Mao Zedong.
I mean, eventually we got to test bans and the non-proliferation treaties, which required obviously a tremendous amount of trust between leaders, a tremendous amount of fear, as you say, of the consequences of not achieving that. Could you describe the system that we ended up with? Because it's quite peculiar that we have the 5 countries who are deemed to have kind of got there on time, and they're allowed to have nuclear weapons, and then everyone else is not supposed to.
Yeah, yeah. So one thing you can count in most cases is fear. And then the question is how to put it to good use, because when you see a tiger, you can freeze, or you can run, or you can grab a weapon and save your life. So fear can work in different ways. But another thing that you can't count on always, because this is an emotion, but important part of our reasoning, and this is self-interest. So what is happening is that once there are 5 countries, and they are the United States, the Soviets steal atomic secrets from the Americans, built the bomb. The UK builds both bombs, relying on its cooperation with the US during World War II. France is there, and China, right, by early 1960s. And the self-interest is that, well, we don't want this exclusive club to grow, right? It's like shares in that enterprise. We don't want new partners. And these countries are on very different sides of the political divide, US and the Soviet Union, but China is also in conflict with the USSR, and Britain and France are together with US, but it depends on the time of the day, how much of cooperation there is happening. So, but they find common interest. We got into this room, and we'll lock the door. And we will try to not allow anybody else to get into this room. And the most astonishing thing that the guys who left out of the room, a good part of them, are welcoming this arrangement because they're concerned that their neighbor can acquire nuclear weapons and change the relations between that your country and other country. But if there are these 5 guys who are really tough and are policing the non-proliferation world, then I can be a little bit less concerned about my immediate neighbor. I don't have any territorial conflict, let's say, with the United States, but I have a territorial conflict with India or somebody else. If they're keeping India from getting nuclear weapons, and this is the case of Pakistan, my situation is better. It changes by 1970s, but that's just to explain the logic where somehow the self-interest of the nuclear powers was part of that, and then partially self-interest also of people who were locked out of that room. But there were others who thought, okay, really have to get the bomb, and India was there, and Israel was there as well.
Well, let's start with those. So you already mentioned South Africa before.
Right.
So let's go through the countries who managed to, or decided to break out of this arrangement that the large countries attempted to impose on the world. So India, how did they go about that?
Yeah, generally it's a risky business if you are trying to go against the nuclear powers. They also happen to be the members of the Security Council. They also have a lot of money and influence, and sometimes they think that they can use violence to stop you from getting nuclear weapons. That's the story of Iran today, right? But the thinking is there much earlier. In the 1960s, Kennedy is trying to approach the Soviets. Let's do the joint military operations against China. And the Soviets don't back that. And there are concerns about Israel. Let's do that against Israel. That doesn't work. And that's one of the reasons why Israel till now didn't admit that it has nuclear weapons, and partially because the way how Israel got nuclear weapons and the conditions where the big guys, including the United States, that assisted Israel in other areas were against that. But then there was the back door into the nuclear club. Back in 1953, the US President Dwight Eisenhower went to the United Nations and delivered a speech in which he said, there are two types of atoms, good and bad. The good ones are about nuclear energy. It can produce electricity. It can drive planes and submarines, and in a few decades they will all be driving not Teslas but nuclear cars, nuclear-powered cars. And then there are bad, and this is the weapons. And you know, guys, you are too irresponsible to give you weapons. We already know, we build the bomb, we know how to handle it, but we don't want to deny you the benefits of nuclear energy, and we are going to help you to build a research reactor, to make a step toward building a nuclear power plant and have electricity. So we are not as selfish as you think. You're not getting the bomb, but you will get, and we are there to help you. Now, what happened, of course, many countries, including Israel, including France, including India, benefited from these early stages that was supported by the first nuclear powers by training the engineers, by creating research facilities and other things. And the road to the acquisition of nuclear bomb by many countries was through the Atoms for Peace program, supported by US and also other countries. And then on the top of that, there was this idea that the nuclear energy and nuclear explosions, not just nuclear energy to produce electricity, nuclear explosions can be put to good service by, for example, creating nuclear explosions and pressing the gas from out of below, and they were trying that in the Rocky Mountains in the United States. It turned out that then water became contaminated for some strange reason once they used that. And
that sounds like a really bad idea.
Well, but you have to experiment, right? Scientists think that they have this responsibility to push things, and then you can dig channels, right? Just 20 nuclear explosions, not of big bombs, small bombs, and you get a channel, or you create a lake or something like that. So late 60s, early 70s, there is the idea of nuclear explosions for peaceful purposes. And when Japan really builds its first explosive device, it doesn't call it bomb. It says, this is a device, nuclear explosion device for peaceful purposes. So the story there is that atoms are atoms. The division them into good and bad is artificial. They can go back and forth, and if you have time and get to the war in Ukraine now, that's exactly what is happening. Atoms for peace are being turned into atoms for war.
So I do want to get to the situation that we're in, because the problem is obviously that as soon as one country breaks out of the straitjacket, for example, India, then Pakistan has to too. And as soon as the North Koreans are concerned about their security, so they decide that they have to as well. And so you get this slippage that continues, and it seems to be...
It's a chain reaction, yeah.
Yeah, it becomes very difficult to do anything about it. The issue with Iran has been occupying the Americans in particular for a long time. So you talk about where we are with Ukraine. We started with Ukraine, I think because the Budapest Memorandum is rightly seen as the high water mark of non-proliferation and also the mark of the naivety of that particular period. Where are we now with Ukraine? If it was a sort of an example of how unfortunate the approach was in the 1990s, what direction are we looking in now?
First of all, most people don't believe who look at that we would have the war of that proportion if Ukraine had nuclear weapons. Nuclear powers go to wars with each other, even direct wars like China and India, for example. Mostly it's a proxy wars, but there are even direct wars, but they never reach the proportions of the sort that happened in Ukraine because the other side is concerned about the nuclear capabilities of the other. So what happened with Budapest Memorandum? One image to think about is you have a house and you have a wall that is really, I'm not sure about the English term for that, but really that's where most of your roof and other is based. So it's key for the stability of the house. You punch a hole in this wall. You don't like it and you put wallpaper there called Budapest Memorandum. You celebrate a big success and you move on. And then wall collapses and you ask yourself, what happened? Everything was so beautiful. We had, so the wall that I'm talking about, the wall that I'm talking about is security infrastructure. The hole that I'm talking about is actually the security vacuum. And either it's nuclear wall, not nuclear wall, security vacuum really attracts aggression. So sooner or later that would happen. So the argument is not that the removing weapons of mass destruction from Ukraine was completely wrong. The argument is that if you decide to do that, you can't leave the security vacuum because the wall will collapse. Not right away, not during your tenure, not before your elections, which are most important for you when you make these decisions, but on somebody else's watch. And that's what happened now. Of course, we are in the situation where the Russian aggression against Ukraine produced new, non-traditional nuclear threats. So the first one is that on the very first day of the all-out aggression in February 2022, Russia occupies Chernobyl. Out of all places. Chernobyl has such huge symbolic importance, significance, and they do that because they are rushing to Kyiv to end the war in 3 days. And as always, they neglect the health issues for their own personnel, for soldiers. They dig trenches in the Red Forest. I wrote in my book that it looks like they never watched HBO miniseries. And my editor just crossed it out, said, okay, this is not the style in which the rest of the book is written, so I had to remove it. But the war for the first time in the world history comes to the nuclear side. 10 days later, battle is taking place on the territory of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. Missiles are being fired, tank is moving in, one of the buildings catches fire. The Russian invading army doesn't have firefighters, but it's the war. They wouldn't allow Ukrainian firefighters for 3 hours to get there. So it's in the Security Council, they called what happened that there was no accident by God's grace that happened. So we got lucky. We got lucky, but the taboo on the attack and occupation of the nuclear sites, it's not there anymore. Now, the accidents happen without even the war. In the conditions of the war, the chances of the accident to happen are extremely high. So when Putin threatens Ukraine and the West with the use of nuclear weapons, I'm not concerned. I don't believe him. Because use nuclear weapons comes with a price. And when he was too loud making these threats in fall of 2022 when the Russian lines started to collapse. Not just the United States or UK, but also China and India suggested that that would be a bad idea. So taboo on the use of nuclear weapons is still there. I don't see it being violated anytime soon. But the so-called accident, attacks on the nuclear power plants, that's already happening. This is real, and I'm really, really concerned also that that threat is not seen by the majority of the politicians who focus traditionally on the use of nuclear weapons and don't see already what is happening. We need really international treaties, we need conventions, we need institutions that would protect the nuclear sites during the war. Last year, a Russian drone hit the confinement, the security confinement over the 4th block of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, punching a hole there. They patched the hole, but really to fix the problem, you need $500 million. But that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that we have attacks on the nuclear sites by drones, and the Russians broke that taboo. The problem is also that you can play this game not together with the country that you attack. Ukrainian drones today reach Volga, they reach Moscow. Ukrainian troops approached 50 kilometers away from the Kursk nuclear power plant. For now, Ukrainians decided not to return favor and not to attack nuclear sites in Russia. But they have the capabilities. And the biggest thing, again, and Ukrainians are not the only ones who have these capabilities. The real thing is that we are in the new world with nuclear sites being under attack. So any conventional war can turn into a nuclear, not because of the nuclear weapons, not because of the atoms for peace, but because of quote-unquote atoms for war. And really, really now the time is to react. Now is the time to create the same sort of taboo on the attack on the nuclear sites as we have today on the use of nuclear weapons.
We have about 15 minutes left. Now, if anyone has questions, which I hope and sure you are, then please put your hands up. There's a lady right in the front. Sorry, could we get right down the front? And please think about extremely intelligent and wonderful questions that you can ask next. There's just a few, yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much for the talk. My father worked at the Sellafield nuclear plant in the UK in the 1950s at the time of a big fire. And after his experience there, where the plant almost melted down, came very close to melting down, he became, as a scientist, completely opposed to nuclear power per se, for the reasons that you describe, the dangers that were inherent in a strike. I wonder whether it has changed, looking at surveying the situations you have recently, whether this has changed your view towards nuclear power, which has been considered a really important part of the war against climate change.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you. I wrote about wind-scale fire, and to meet in person someone who is related to that story is really something important. And what generally there are smart people working on nuclear issues, and with every accident, there are commissions that look into that, and there is a learning process, and we have less often nuclear accidents than we had during the first 10 or 20 years of the nuclear age. So there is some hope about that. But there is such thing as, it seems to me, I'm not confusing anything, it seems to me they're called normal accidents. The idea is that in the complex system, including reactors and other things, our human mind just has limitations. We can't predict everything, and that accidents in the complex systems, they can happen. We are now on the verge of the new age in the nuclear power, the modular reactors. This will be the first reactors created specifically for the purpose of boiling water. Every reactor that we have today was created for military purposes and then adjusted to boil water. So that will be the first ones that will be created with that purpose. And they're more secure than the old reactors. My problem is that I am a historian. And what I know, and every historian knows, that every new technology, doesn't matter how smart it is, it will go through the period of screw-ups. We all buy and drive cars, and we know that there are improvements, and they keep recalling them. You can't predict everything. So the question is whether we should really kiss goodbye to nuclear energy and focus on something else. You can't really put the gin back into the bottle. That's one thing. And another one is with the climate change, we need not just solar and not just wind, but we need nuclear as well. So my argument is not pro or against nuclear energy. My argument is that we have to make it as safe as possible, but still expect that things can happen along the way. We get into the car, we know that accidents do happen, and we accept this risk. We build nuclear reactors, and there is a taboo talking on that something can go wrong. So when something goes wrong, the entire industry gets frozen on 20 years. And you counted on that, doing this and that. So my mission in this sense really try to protect the reactors that we have, and also to educate the public that no matter, we bring there the smartest people we have, but still the systems are complex. These are new technologies, and they will be priced not just in terms of the pounds or dollars or whatever it is, but also in terms of the impact on human life. So that's at least where I stand, but of course you know that debates are going, and people have different positions on that. Thank you.
I think we had a question over there. Yes, thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you. I was just curious to understand what you think the Russian motivation was for occupying Chernobyl during the 2022 invasion and actually launching attacks on the infrastructure, because I mean it seems obvious. Obviously, you know, if we think back to the original explosion, you know, radiation was detected as far as Sweden and Germany and elsewhere in Eastern Europe, and you know, radiation doesn't respect national borders. It can spread through water, wind, what have you. And obviously we know that about nuclear weapons, but when it comes to reactor explosions, that's like a even less kind of tactical, kind of precise weapon, right? If you were to deliberately set it off. So do you think they were doing it as almost a psychological attack on Ukraine, or was it more almost accidental? And they, you know, yeah, I'm just kind of curious to see what you thought about it.
Yeah, it happened on the way, right? So what they did, they put the Russian troops in Belarus, specifically to attack Kyiv. The shortest way to Kyiv would be from Belarus. They sent them allegedly for military exercises. And then the shortest way would go through the exclusion Chernobyl zone, with their tanks moving through, raising the dust, which was radioactive dust, and then occupying the what I was really shocked about, that there is very little that change in the managerial, political culture in Russia between Chernobyl 1986 and Chernobyl 2022. The politicians and the commanders don't give a damn about the health of their own soldiers. So they were inhaling all of that. They were digging in radioactive. No one cared about that. There was a strategic goal. They were trying to get to Kyiv. They didn't get Kyiv, and eventually Ukrainians pushed back. They withdrew. In the south, they were moving again from the Crimea, and they occupied the station. After the Ukrainian National Guard that protected Chernobyl, they didn't know what to do, whether what is loyalty, what is betrayal? You don't fight, you betray Ukraine. You fight, you betray the world because you bring fighting on the nuclear side. So in Zaporizhia, when they saw that the National Guard in Chernobyl was taken prisoners of war by Russians, they fought back. And the fight was there. So it's basically military planning and complete disregard for the issues of safety, not just for the Ukrainian population globally, but for their own soldiers.
We have a lady here, I think, with a microphone. Oh, you've got, sorry, yes, you were first. My apologies.
Hi. You've partially answered my question, but where is the first small, medium reactor, and which Rolls-Royce is seen as a possible provider, and where is thorium at? Where are these reactors that people talk about?
The modular reactors.
Yeah, the modular reactors, as far as I understand, they're supposed to appear. They're not, as far as I know, they were not built yet, but it's close to that. Again, am I wrong on that? No?
I think Rolls-Royce is building one.
Again, at least I don't know about. I keep reading that they're coming, but I don't know whether they already arrived. Yeah. Sorry.
There's a lady with a microphone there, and once you've asked your question, could you pass it to the lady just there, and maybe we could get two questions together. Yeah.
Yes, excellent presentation. Thank you both. Could you please discuss Iran?
Yeah, and could you pass to the lady there?
Sure,
and tell you what, if you could ask your question as well, you make it double the difficulty.
I understand your point about the taboo on using nuclear weapons, but I wonder, and it relates actually to your question, if there's a taboo on developing them and what that means for safety.
I'm not sure I got
So
this.
could you discuss Iran? And,
Iran,
and you said there's a taboo on using nuclear weapons dating from Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yes. Sure, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so clearly there are attempts to stop developing nuclear weapons, because once the nuclear weapons are there, they're there and North Korea controls them. So the taboo on the use of nuclear weapons is self-imposed by the countries that have nuclear weapons. And this desire to stop at almost any cost the development of nuclear weapons is, of course, something that is imposed on that particular country. This is not something that, I don't know, Iranian government or some other government decides not to do that and ascribe to that taboo. They're forced to do that more or less successfully. Now, with Iran, as a historian, I look at Iran and I see a familiar story. Before every new member of that nuclear club gets into the room, there is a really huge concerns and almost paranoia in the world that the world comes to an end. That was with North Korea. That was with Pakistan, the first Islamic bomb. That was before that with China. I was discussing that Kennedy was prepared to go militarily. And then that country acquires nuclear weapon and nothing happens. But attempts to preclude the development of nuclear weapons on a number of occasions went wrong. We started with Ukraine. That's a triumph of denuclearization that brings huge war. The war in Iraq was justified by weapons of mass destruction, including the nuclear weapons. With the war in Iran, we had all sorts of messaging from the White House. Eventually, they settled that that was about nuclear weapons, but before that, there was argument that the nuclear program was destroyed. So what we see is that the attempt to stop somebody from developing nuclear weapons, if things done wrong, they produce major calamities. It doesn't mean that nuclear Iran is a good thing. What that means, or what I try to say, that there are better ways of dealing with that. And until 2018, we had an agreement that from the perspective of most of the people was working. And in 2018, the United States withdrew from that agreement. So what I see now, new nuclear states, historically speaking, didn't produce new wars, but misguided attempt done the wrong way to stop others from developing nuclear weapons produce wars. History, that we can't predict the future. It doesn't mean that will be happening again and again, but I can tell you what happened so far, and that's the pattern that I see.
I think we've got time for one more question. There was one down the front here. Should we come down to the front again? Thank you. Sorry to make you keep walking around.
Thanks very much. You said, or at least implied, that the balance of nuclear power had worked, and that there's not been a major global war, no World War III. We're 80 years on now.
Yes.
If nuclear, the nuclear effort had failed completely, it was impossible to produce a bomb, do you think we would have had World War III by now?
That's a tough one.
Again, I think the chances would be much higher. I know that there was a kind of a regret on the part of the United States that they developed the bomb. That's when the Soviets got the bomb, and President Eisenhower was at that time thinking, okay, before that there was Atlantic, and there was the most powerful navy, and there was army, and no one could threaten New York, right? And suddenly New York and Washington were under threat with the development of nuclear weapons, and then Sputnik and other things. So clearly there were also people who wished that the nuclear weapons would be not there anymore. In terms of whether there would be the next war, World War III, I'm almost sure that there would be. I give you an example which is a little bit ambiguous, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The reason why the Kennedy didn't attack Cuba when the Soviet missiles were there, because he learned that the missiles were already ready to be used. If he would attack, there would be huge miscalculations. Americans thought there was 10,000 Soviet troops, there were 40,000. So there would be a potential beginning of the Third World War. Kennedy waited for 1 week because he was not sure about the nuclear, and then introduced blockade, which was called quarantine for the legal reasons and others, instead of sending Marines. So again, it's ambiguous because the conflict came to the fore because also of the nuclear weapons. That's why it's not a clear-cut case. But this is one way to think about that, one of the most dangerous moments in the history of the Cold War.
Thank you, everyone. We are out of time. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. I can't recommend this book enough. It may not mention the HBO series Chernobyl, but apart from that, it is flawless. Thank you, Serhii. Serhii will be in the bookshop signing books, and please join me in thanking him for coming.